Welcome to the debate. Open your phone, scroll through your contacts. If your life completely fell apart today, who would you actually call? And how long has it been since you truly spoke to them? Tonight we explore the friendship graveyard and the terrifying reality of waking up in your 40s and realizing both men and women are drowning in complete isolation.
Yeah, it really is a chilling question to ask yourself.
It is. I actually did this exercise myself this morning. I scrolled through my own contacts, and honestly, the result was incredibly sobering. It forces a really uncomfortable realization about where our social lives actually go as we age.
Oh, absolutely.
So today we're looking at this through the lens of recent psychological research regarding this invisible, genderless crisis known as the Adult Isolation Epidemic. And my perspective on this material is that this fading of social circles is actually the natural, inevitable structural shift of mature adulthood. Like, it's driven by the necessary, pragmatic prioritization of family and, well, survival.
Right. And my position is that by normalizing this silent erasure of our friendships, we are masking a devastating psychological crisis. It strips us of our fundamental biological need for connection, and it leaves modern adults completely vulnerable during the absolute hardest, most demanding years of their lives.
Okay, let's start with the reality of what happens when human beings transition into their late 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because we have this tendency in our culture to frame the loss of friendships during this period as like a personal failure.
Mm-hmm. People blame themselves.
Exactly. We think, I didn't try hard enough, or I'm just a bad friend. But if we look at the source material, it highlights the crushing weight of modern life, the careers, the mortgages, the endless family responsibilities. I argue that losing friends in this phase of life is simply a reflection of maturity, not pathology. Your nuclear family and your survival rightfully demand your primary energy.
I hear that. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Treating extreme isolation as a badge of maturity is incredibly dangerous. You're taking a deeply traumatic sociological shift and dressing it up as responsible adulthood.
But it is responsible.
Is it, though? Human beings are profoundly tribal creatures. Evolutionarily speaking, we are wired to survive and, crucially, to regulate our nervous systems within a community. When you strip away that tribe, you destroy our mental health.
I don't disagree that we evolved in tribes, but we don't live in the Pleistocene epoch anymore. We live in a heavily structured modern economy. When adults say to each other, we should really catch up soon, and then neither of them follows through for 6 months, they aren't failing at friendship.
Right.
They are engaging in a polite fiction. It's a social tool. We use it to gently acknowledge to each other that our boundaries have shrunk, that our family is our new circle. It's a peaceful, mutual transition of priorities based on the reality of limited time.
Peaceful? The stark reality presented in the research is that millions of adults are surrounded by hundreds of coworkers every single day, yet if a personal tragedy struck this afternoon, they have absolutely no one to call.
Well,
that isn't peaceful adaptation. That is a collective delusion. We are all pretending to be perfectly fine while suffering a profound, silent grief over friendships that we've essentially starved to death in this friendship graveyard. Normalizing extreme loneliness under the guise of being grown up just doesn't make the psychological toll any less severe.
Okay, you call it a delusion, but I think we need to look at the actual mechanics of being busy, because the text we're drawing from specifically notes that there is no bad guy here.
No, of course not.
Right. People aren't maliciously abandoning their friends. Friendships are simply murdered by the word busy. And what does busy actually mean in your 30s and 40s? It means mothers are managing this immense, invisible mental load of the household. The doctor's appointments, the emotional regulation of toddlers, the meal planning.
Yeah, it's relentless.
And fathers are entirely consumed by the pressure to provide, terrified that one misstep at work jeopardizes the family's security.
Exactly. They are consumed.
Right, but it's a necessary consumption. Let me offer an analogy to explain the mechanics of this. Think of our youth friendships, the ones from high school and our 20s, like a high-yield savings account.
Okay.
We invested heavily in them when we had abundant free time. The interest compounded over years of shared experiences, and they are wonderful assets to have. But adulthood, the mortgage, raising children, maintaining a demanding career, that is your daily checking account.
The daily grind.
Yes, you absolutely must fund the checking account every single day just to survive the week. If that checking account hits zero, the entire structure of your life collapses. You lose the house, the kids suffer. It is a completely pragmatic rationing of limited emotional and physical energy to stop funding the savings account so you can keep the checking account afloat.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the physiological and psychological horror of that exact dynamic? You just described a survival mechanism, not a human life.
But survival is the prerequisite for life. You can't have a thriving social life if you can't pay your mortgage.
True, but being murdered by the word busy is a symptom of a crushing modern grind that we've just passively decided to accept as normal. Let's look at the biology of what happens when you stop funding that savings account, as you put it. In our 20s, if you had a terrible day, you went back to your apartment, sat on the couch with a roommate or a friend, and you vented.
Right.
What happens biologically in that moment? Your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, begin to drop. Your breathing slows. Your nervous system literally co-regulates with the other human being in the room.
Because you had the luxury of time to sit on that couch.
But the biological need for that co-regulation doesn't vanish just because you get a mortgage. Fast forward to 40. You have a terrible day at work, you commute home, you walk into a house with a screaming toddler and a spouse who is just as burned out as you are.
Which is very common, yeah.
There is no co-regulation. You are carrying the physical stress hormone of the workday straight into your living room. The men and women in the source material aren't just rationally prioritizing their checking accounts. The text explicitly states they are drowning. They are dying of loneliness inside crowded homes.
Drowning is a strong word, though. I think what they're feeling is the natural friction of bearing responsibility.
When a mother is so crushed by the administrative burden of her household that she literally does not have the cognitive bandwidth to maintain a single confidant outside her marriage, or when a father is so isolated by the pressure to provide that his entire identity shrinks down to a paycheck and a spot on the couch, that is an epidemic.
But is it capitalism or just life?
It's the capitalist grind cannibalizing our fundamental human need for connection. We are sacrificing our psychological safety nets just to keep the lights on, and the result is chronic physical exhaustion. People think they are tired because they work hard. They are actually tired because their nervous systems never get to downregulate with a peer.
Look, I understand the physiological mechanism you're describing, but you're treating the nuclear family and the responsibilities of adulthood as if they are an unnatural imposition. I argue that they are the core biological and social focus of this stage of life. The energy we used to spend regulating our nervous systems with our friends is now spent regulating our children's nervous systems. That's not capitalism cannibalizing us. That's generational investment.
The parents are running on empty. You can't regulate a child's nervous system if your own is completely fried from chronic isolation.
Let's shift gears slightly, because if we accept for a moment that the energy is simply gone, whether we blame capitalism or just the reality of raising kids, it perfectly explains how these friendships end. The source material draws a really sharp contrast between the way relationships end in our youth versus our adult years.
They are very different, yes.
Think about teenage friendships. They end in fire. Dramatic arguments, blow-ups, lines drawn in the sand, very clear severing of ties. But adult friendships die a remarkably quiet death. They just fade.
Which is exactly what makes it so insidious.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I view this quiet fade as an indication of a profound, mutual, unspoken agreement between adults. Think about it. If someone cancels plans on you in your 20s, you're offended.
Right.
If someone cancels plans on you in your 40s, you feel a massive wave of relief. Why? Because you are both exhausted. There's no drama because there is mutual respect for the crushing weight the other person is carrying. It's two people who deeply understand each other's lack of capacity. You don't blow up at your friend for not calling because you know exactly why they aren't calling. They're trying to keep their own checking account above zero.
But that realization, that relief when plans are canceled, is exactly what makes this epidemic so utterly terrifying. The silent erasure means there's
absolutely no closure.
Closure from what?
From the loss. When a teenage friendship blows up in a dramatic argument, yes, it hurts. But you know it's over. Your brain can process the grief. You could move on. But in the friendship graveyard, it's a completely different psychological phenomenon. People simply wake up in their 40s or 50s and realize they haven't had a deep, meaningful, vulnerable conversation in 3 years.
But if there was no big fight, why does it have to be traumatic? They just drifted.
Because the lack of drama does not mean a lack of trauma. In psychology, there is a concept called ambiguous loss. It was originally used to describe the grief families feel when a loved one goes missing in action. The person is physically absent, but psychologically present in the minds of the family.
Okay, I'm following you.
With the silent erasure of adult friendships, we experience the inverse of ambiguous loss. The person is physically present in the world. You still have their number in your phone, you still like their photos on social media, you see that they exist, but they are completely psychologically absent from your life.
That's a fascinating application of ambiguous loss. You're saying the connection becomes a ghost.
Exactly. It's a ghost connection. And because there was no precipitating event, no big fight to justify the loss, people don't know how to grieve it. So they just internalize the isolation. They think, well, I guess this is just what being an adult is.
Yeah, I've heard so many people say exactly that.
Right. And as a result, they navigate the absolute hardest, most complex years of their lives, caring for aging parents, facing career burnout, going through marital struggles, and devastating psychological isolation. They have no outlet, precisely because the erasure was so silent that they didn't even notice the safety net was gone until they were already falling.
If we look at this through the lens of ambiguous loss, I can certainly see the melancholic reality of it. It implies that something is missing that genuinely should be there. But again, let's look at the climax of this entire process. Let's look at the emotional core of actually surrendering these relationships to the graveyard.
Okay.
If we accept the premise that our energy is a strictly finite resource, then the quiet death of these friendships isn't just a tragedy, it's a protective mechanism.
Protective of what?
Protective of the individual's basic functioning. We simply do not have the energy to maintain these bonds while keeping a family afloat. It requires immense cognitive and emotional bandwidth to sustain a deep, meaningful conversation. You have to actively listen. You have to employ empathy. You have to recall details about their life.
Of course you do. That's friendship.
Right. But when you have spent 10 hours navigating the intense politics of a modern workplace, and then another 4 hours managing the emotional and physical needs of your children, the tank isn't just low, it is empty.
But
Let me just finish this thought. Surrendering the friendship in that moment isn't a failure of character. It isn't even a failure of society. It is the mathematical inevitability of modern adulthood. You cannot pour from an empty cup. We let these friendships go because we literally cannot hold on to them without dropping the more critical responsibilities we've taken on.
And that right there, well, that is the heartbreaking realization at the very core of this entire crisis. What you just said captures the exact tragedy the source material is warning us about.
That we don't have the bandwidth?
No. The true horror of the friendship graveyard isn't just that people leave. It isn't just that geographical distance or changing careers force us apart. It's that we let them go without a fight. We surrender our deepest, most vital connections because we are simply too tired from surviving adulthood to reach out our hands.
We don't fight because we can't afford to.
Think about the profound tragedy of that. We are so beaten down by the daily requirement of just existing, by the mortgage, by the mental load of scheduling and coordinating a household, by the relentless pressure to provide, that when our most cherished, life-sustaining connections start to slip away, we don't grab them.
We just let them slip.
We just stand there and watch them fade. We let our tribes dissolve, not because we don't love our friends, but because we are literally too exhausted to send a text message. We convince ourselves that we'll catch up soon, knowing deep down we won't. That isn't maturity. That is defeat.
It is incredibly sobering when you frame it as a defeat. I think looking at it that way strips away the comfort of the polite fiction we've been using to protect ourselves. I will concede that there is a profound, almost terrifying vulnerability that comes with isolating oneself entirely within the nuclear family and the workplace.
It places an impossible burden on marriages, too. You're suddenly expecting your spouse to be your co-parent, your romantic partner, your financial partner, and your entire social village.
Exactly. When all of your emotional capital is tied up in your spouse, your children, and your career, a crisis in any of those three areas leaves you completely without a safety net. If you lose your job or your marriage hits a rough patch, who do you talk to? The emotional toll of this modern structure is undeniably real, and recognizing that you can have a phone full of contacts, hundreds of colleagues, and a busy household, but absolutely no one to call on a true dark night of the soul, that is a very heavy price to pay for what we call growing up.
It is. And on the other side, I will acknowledge the structural reality you've laid out today. The pressure to provide and the staggering mental load of running a household are not illusions. They aren't excuses people make up. They are very real, tangible forces that legitimately strip adults of their cognitive and emotional energy. People are not abandoning their friends out of malice or carelessness. They are doing it out of sheer exhaustion.
The checking account requires daily deposits.
It does. The prioritization of immediate survival is a logic that is incredibly hard to escape when you are the one responsible for keeping a roof over your family's head. I understand why the silent erasure happens. The exhaustion is real, but the biological consequence of that isolation is equally real.
It really highlights the melancholic complexity of adulthood, doesn't it? It forces us to sit with a very uncomfortable tension. Whether we view this fading of friendships as a necessary, pragmatic maturity that we must accept, or a tragic, silent erasure that we need to actively fight against. Wait, no, whether we fight it or accept it, this isolation is an undeniable, defining characteristic of modern life. It forces us to ask very difficult questions about how we have structured our daily lives, and what parts of our humanity we are willing to sacrifice in the name of surviving.
It absolutely does. It warrants deep self-reflection from every single person listening to this, because the cost of this silence is a profound shared loneliness. We are living in a society where millions of people are silently grieving the loss of their tribes, and we are all collectively pretending the graveyard isn't right there in our phones.
Send that text, make that call, because the graveyard gets a little bigger every time you say, "I'm just too busy this week."